The arena lights hummed with that familiar electric anticipation, the kind that only exists in the moments before a main event. It was 2025, and the landscape of the WWE had shifted, yet the hunger of the crowd remained primal and unchanged. They were waiting for a standard entrance, a familiar theme song, perhaps a returning champion they thought they knew. But the air in the building felt different tonight. There was a heaviness, a static charge that pricked the skin of the 50,000 souls in attendance. For months, the rumors had swirled whispers in dirt sheets, vague tweets, and shadowed Instagram stories, but nothing concrete. She had vanished from the public eye, leaving behind a legacy of high-flying moves and colorful gear, a superhero to the children and an icon to the purists. But absence changes a person. The silence she left behind had grown loud. When the lights finally cut out, plunging the stadium into absolute suffocating darkness, the initial roar of the crowd wasn't one of excitement. It was one of confusion. Usually, a Titantron flickers to life instantly. Usually, the bass of a drum hits within seconds. Tonight, the darkness lingered for 10, maybe 20 seconds. It was an eternity in television time. The producers in the truck held their breath. The commentators fell silent, their headsets pressing against ears, straining for a cue that wasn't coming. In that pitch black, the audience was forced to sit with their own expectations. They expected neon. They expected smiles. They expected the wrestler they remembered. But the woman standing behind the curtain was no longer that person. She had shed the skin of her past self during her time away, forged in a fire that the fans never saw. The darkness wasn't a technical glitch. It was a canvas. And on that canvas, she was about to paint a masterpiece of intimidation that would redefine her career forever. The silence was the first weapon in her new arsenal. Then, a sound. Not music, but a low mechanical thrumming, like the heartbeat of a massive machine waking up deep underground. A single spotlight, cold and white, pierced the darkness, hitting the top of the entrance ramp. It didn't reveal a face. It revealed metal. The collective gasp of 50,000 people sucked the oxygen out of the room. There she stood, but she was unrecognizable. Gone were the vibrant spandex and the flowing robes of the past. Their place was a coat that looked heavy enough to crush a normal human. It was plated in chrome and brushed steel, segmented like the armor of a futuristic samurai or a medieval knight reimagined for a cyberpunk war. The light caught the sharp angles of the shoulder pads, reflecting blinding beams into the crowd. She didn't move. She stood like a statue, a monument to something colder and harder than the wrestling world was used to. The steel-plated coat extended to the floor, hiding her movement, making her look like a monolith rising from the earth. The silence broke not with a cheer, but with a low rumble of shock that grew into a deafening roar of disbelief. This wasn't just a costume change. It was a metamorphosis. As she took her first step, the plates on the coat shifted with a visible, heavy fluidity. Clink, shift, clink. You could almost hear the weight of it. She walked slowly, methodically. There was no waving to the fans, no slapping hands. Her eyes were hidden behind a visor of polished silver, reflecting the stunned faces of the front row back at them. The pyro didn't explode in a celebration. It erupted in harsh, rhythmic blasts of white fire that matched her footsteps. She looked dangerous. She looked expensive. She looked like the final boss of a video game come to life. The arena didn't just explode. It broke. The image of that steel coat burned itself instantly into the history books. While the arena was losing its mind, a different kind of chaos was unfolding behind the curtain. The gorilla positioned the nerve center of the show, where the executives and producers' cities, usually a place of controlled shouting and precise timing. But tonight, as she walked through the curtain and out onto the ramp, the mood in Gorilla shifted from management to awe. Even the veterans, the men and women who had seen everything from the Attitude Era to the modern day, stood up from their monitors. Reports surfaced later that the script simply said, "She returns." No one. Not even the camera operators had been warned about the steel aesthetic. The producers scrambled to adjust the lighting on the fly because the chrome was reflecting the spotlights too intensely, flaring out the cameras. It was a beautiful disaster. The director was shouting for wide shots to capture the scale, realizing that a close-up couldn't convey the menacing aura she was projecting. One producer reportedly dropped his headset. They weren't just watching a segment. They were watching a risk that paid off instantly. There is always a fear in wrestling that a new look will be rejected, mocked, or memed into oblivion within minutes. But the atmosphere here was undeniably serious. The executives looked at each other, realizing the merchandise potential. Yes, but also realizing they had lost control of the narrative. She wasn't playing a character they wrote anymore. This look, this armor, was her creation. It was a statement of autonomy. The panic in Gorilla wasn't about something going wrong. It was the panic of realizing the talent had surpassed the machine. She had walked out there and made the rest of the show look like a cartoon, while she looked like high-concept cinema. Further back, deep in the locker rooms, the reaction was more personal. Wrestling is a competitive ecosystem. Every athlete is fighting for screen time, for the main event, for the spotlight. When a top star returns, there is always tension. But when a top star returns looking like that, the tension turns into insecurity. The monitors in the women's locker room were surrounded. Champions and challengers alike stopped taping their wrists and lacing their boots to watch the screen. The silence in the locker room mirrored the initial silence of the arena. They weren't seeing a colleague return. They were seeing the bar being raised to a height they weren't prepared for. The intricate detailing of the steel coat, the cold demeanor, the way the crowd treated her like a deity, instantly aged everyone else's gimmick. One young rookie reportedly asked, "How are we supposed to fight that?" It was a valid question. The presentation was so dominant that it blurred the lines of reality. Ow. Do you put a wrestler in a headlock when she looks like a machine built for war? The psychological warfare had begun before she even threw a punch. The veterans felt a sudden pressure to evolve. The colorful, fun characters suddenly felt childish in comparison to the Steel Queen walking down the ramp. There were whispers of jealousy. Of course, whispers that she was trying too hard, that the coat was too heavy, that it was style over substance. But those whispers were drowned out by the undeniable fact that the hierarchy had shifted. The locker room knew, perhaps even more than the fans, that the landscape of the division had just changed. The ecosystem had a new apex predator, and she was armored against anything they could throw at her. In 2025, the measure of a wrestling moment isn't just the decibel level in the stadium, it's the speed at which it travels around the globe. The moment the pyro hit and the steel coat reflected the arena lights, social media didn't just trend. It melted down. The image was perfectly designed for the viral age. It was striking, minimalist yet complex, and utterly devoid of context. It demanded to be shared. Within 3 minutes, the hashtag of her name was the #1 trend worldwide, surpassing political news and sporting events. But it wasn't just wrestling fans. Concept art communities, fashion blogs, and sci-fi forums began sharing the screenshots. Is this a movie? Who designed this? This is the hardest look of the year. The crossover appeal was instantaneous. People who hadn't watched wrestling in a decade were retweeting the video clip of her entrance, captivated by the sheer aesthetics of the moment. The memes began, but they weren't mocking. They were reverent. Artists began sketching her in real time, posting digital paintings of the steel coat within the hour. The mystery of the look drove engagement. Why steel? Why now? The lack of a promo, the lack of explanation, created a vacuum that the internet was desperate to fill with theories. Was she a villain now? Was she a broken hero, repairing herself? The engagement metrics were shattering records, proving that in an era of constant noise, mystery, and visual storytelling were still king. The digital shockwave was proof that she had transcended the sport. She wasn't just a wrestler returning to a ring. She was a pop culture moment, a visual icon that demanded attention from every corner of the internet. As the initial shock settled, the analysis began. Video essays much like this once started popping up, trying to decode the language of her attire. Wrestling has always been a language of symbols. Spandex means athleticism. Leather means rebellion. But steel? Steel means something entirely different. Fans and critics began dissecting the details. The coat wasn't just armor, it was a barrier. It symbolized a woman who was done letting the world touch her. In her previous run, she was known for being accessible, emotional, and open. The steel represented a closing of the heart, suggested that she had been hurt perhaps by the management, perhaps by the fans who turned on her, or perhaps by the injuries that took her out. The steel was a physical manifestation of an emotional callus. Some observers noted the specific design of the shoulder plates, reminiscent of jagged rocks. It implied that she was immovable, the unbreakable one. Others focused on the mask visor she wore. By hiding her eyes, she was denying the audience the connection they craved. She was taking away their ability to read her emotions, which is the ultimate power move. You cannot manipulate what you cannot read. The media narrative shifted from "she is back" to "she has evolved." The conversation became about trauma and resilience. The steel coat wasn't just a cool costume. It was a story of survival woven into metal. It told the world that she had been broken, and in the process of putting herself back together, she decided to make the new pieces harder than the old ones. The symbolism added a depth to the return that a simple microphone promo never could have achieved. While the world analyzed the fashion and the fans screamed their lungs out, there was one person who had the worst seat in the house, the opponent waiting in the ring. It is easy to forget, amidst the spectacle, that there was another human being standing inside the squared circle, forced to watch this entrance unfold. The camera caught a fleeting expression on the opponent's face as the steel-clad figure reached the steel steps. It wasn't fear exactly, it was irrelevance. The opponent, a champion in her own right, suddenly looked like a supporting character in someone else's movie. This is the true power of a breaking the arena moment. It sucks the gravity away from everyone else. The champion held her belt tight, but the belt looked like a toy compared to the grandeur of the challenger's armor. How do you prepare for a match when the psychological battle is lost before the bell rings? The opponent shifted her weight, trying to stay loose, trying to keep warm, but the waiting game is a killer. The slow, deliberate pace of the steel-clad walker forced the opponent to wait on her time. It was a dominance display. Every second she took to unclasp the heavy coat, letting it fall to the floor with a heavy thud, was a second she controlled. When the coat finally dropped, revealing the gear underneath sleek, black utilitarian, the contrast was striking. The opponent was flashy. The returner was deadly serious. The crowd saw the difference. One was there to perform. The other was there to execute. The opponent's bravado melted away, replaced by a defensive crouch. The sheer visual weight of the entrance had done the work of 10 minutes of grappling. The match that followed was defined not by high spots or flips, but by the atmosphere the entrance had created. The crowd was quieter than usual during the actual wrestling, but it was a focused silence. They were studying her. If they were looking for signs of rust, but they found only precision. The commentary team lowered their voices, treating the match with a hushed reverence usually reserved for golf or tennis. She moves differently now, they noted, and she did. The steel coat was gone, but the steel remained in her movement. She didn't play to the crowd. She didn't look for applause after a takedown. She simply inflicted pain with a cold detachment. Every time she hit the mat, it felt heavier. Every strike felt more consequential. The story told in the ring was a direct continuation of the story told on the ramp. The new look wasn't just for show. It was a warning label for the violence she was capable of. When she locked in her submission hold, she didn't grimace or scream. She stared blankly ahead, cold and unfeeling. The opponent tapped out not just from pain, but from the overwhelming pressure of the moment. The bell rang, but the celebration was muted. She didn't climb the turnbuckle to pose. She didn't smile. She simply stood over her fallen opponent, looking down like a statue. The arena wasn't chanting, "You deserve it," or "This is awesome." They were just watching, captivated by this new, terrifying entity. The match was a massacre, not of the body, but of the spirit. She had dismantled the champion, and she had done it without showing a single flicker of human emotion. The show ended. The cameras cut to black. The copyright logo flashed on the screen, but the story continued in the shadows of the arena tunnels. We often imagine that after a moment like that of viral, arena-breaking return, the wrestler is popping champagne and high-fiving everyone. But reality is often more somber. She walked back up the ramp, leaving the deafening noise behind. The adrenaline began to fade. The transition from godlike figure to human being is a jarring crash. She walked through the curtain, back into the gorilla position. The applause from the crew was hesitant, respectful, but distant. She had succeeded in intimidating everyone, even her coworkers. She nodded to them, brief and professional, and kept walking. She didn't stop to check her phone, though it was blowing up with millions of notifications. She didn't stop to do interviews. She headed straight for her dressing room. Inside the quiet of that concrete room, the reality of the night set in. She sat on a folding chair, the heavy steel coat hanging on a rack in the corner, like the husk of a shed skin. It stared back at her. The physical toll of wearing that weight, combined with the emotional toll of the return, was exhausting. Her hands shook just a little, not from fear, but from the release of tension. To be that cold, to be that hard, requires an immense amount of energy. It is a performance of isolation. To be the Queen of Steel means you cannot let anyone in. It is a lonely mountaintop to stand on. The fans saw a monster. The mirror reflected a woman who was just trying to protect herself from getting hurt again. Everyone thought the new look was an act of aggression. They thought the steel coat was a weapon, a sign that she was coming to destroy the division. Looking at it hanging there in the locker room, the truth reveals itself. Armor is not offensive. Armor is defensive. You don't wear a steel plate to attack. You wear it because you are afraid of being cut. The shocker of 2025 wasn't that she came back looking like a villain. The shocker was that the strongest woman in the company felt the need to hide behind metal, to feel safe enough to walk down that ramp. The silence of the crowd, the fear of the opponent, the panic of the producers at all, stemmed from a misunderstanding. They saw power. She felt survival. As she packed her bag, leaving the steel coat for the prop master to handle, she looked more human than she had all night. The viral moment was a success. The arena was broken. The world was watching, but as she walked out to her car in the cool night air, she was just a person again. The steel was a lie, she told the world, so she could survive the truth of the business. And perhaps that is the most cinematic tragedy of all, that to be loved by millions, she had to become something that couldn't feel their love at all. She drove away into the night, the steel coat left behind in the dark, waiting for the next show. Waiting to turn the woman back into the machine.